Madam President.
Senator from Maine.
Madam President, I rise to join my colleague from Rhode Island and talk about climate change, but I want to start with history that has nothing to do with climate change. The history I want to talk about is Europe and England, particularly in the 1930s. In the 1930s, there was a looming threat from Germany to the peace of Europe and to the existence of England. That threat was real, and there were multiple signs, there was data, but there were very few people who wanted to do anything about it because it would have caused disruption, economic disruption and personal disruption in its long history. I rise today, Madam President, because we are entering a period of consequences. It's 1936. It's August of 2001 when we had warnings Al-Qaeda determined to strike in the United States. Here's the data. This is a chart. I actually carry this chart around in my iPhone, but I blew it up for today's purposes. It's a chart of the last million years of CO2 in the atmosphere. And this chart, I believe, answers two of the three basic questions about global climate change. The first is something happening? And occasionally you hear people say, well, climate change happens in cycles and CO2 goes up and down and we're just in a cycle and it's no big deal. This is a million years, Madam President. And for the past 999,000 plus, you did have cycles. The cycles were between about 180 parts per million in the atmosphere up to about 250. 280, I think, was the highest back 400,000 years ago. But this has been the cycle for before human beings started to actively impinge upon the environment. And then comes the year 1000. We go along here at the fairly high level. And then around 1860, it starts to go up. What happened in 1860? That's the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. That's when we started to burn fossil fuels in large quantities, whether it was coal, later oil, gas. But this is when it happened. So this answers the second question. Do people have anything to do with it? Of course they do. It would be the greatest coincidence in the history of the world if this change just happened to begin at the same time as the Industrial Revolution. And then you see where it's gone since 1960. This chart actually is a couple of years out of date. This point is just below 400 parts per million. We passed 400 parts per million this summer. We're now here. I don't see how anyone can look at this chart and conclude anything else. A, something's happening to CO2 in the atmosphere. B, people are involved in causing it. I just don't see how you can escape that. Now, the last time, this is I think the other piece about this 400, the last time we had 400 parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere, we know from ice cores, was 3 million years ago. 3 million years ago, during the Pliocene. I knew someday my sixth grade geology would come to the fore. The Pliocene period. And Madam President, when we had 400 parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere 3 million years ago, sea levels were 60 to 80 feet higher than they are today. Value. And what's happening in Maine is that as the water gets warmer, the lobsters go north. And is the water getting warmer? Here's Maine, Booth Bay Harbor, Maine, a great town. Anybody wants to visit, wonderful place to visit. I've got to get in that little bit of promotion. Here's the water temperature at Booth Bay Harbor over the last 100 years. It's going up. It's getting warmer. And it's going, there's no indication. In fact, if you follow the curve here, it appears that it's headed into an accelerating mode, the famous hockey stick. Anything above 68 degrees of water temperature is very stressful to lobsters. I hate raising problems and not talking about what to do. And by the way, I have to say, I'm really puzzled why this has become a partisan issue. I don't understand it. Maybe it's because Al Gore invented it. I don't know. But I don't understand why this became a partisan issue, because it's a scientific issue. It's a data issue, and the data is overwhelming. Okay, so what do we do? And by the way, I should mention, when I was a young man working in and around the legislature in Maine, the leaders of the environmental movement in Maine who passed the major legislation to protect our environment were all Republicans. Not all, but most of them were Republicans, and they were great names in Maine history. Well, okay, what do we do? The first thing we have to do is admit there's a problem. If you don't admit there's a problem, you, by definition, can't address it. So that's number one. I think the data is just, to me, it's pretty simple. The big picture answer is we've got to stop burning so much stuff. And that's what's putting carbon in the atmosphere, whether it's in our automobiles, our homes, our factories, our power plants. It's burning fossil fuel that's putting CO2 into the atmosphere. I believe this is a case where we absolutely have to have international cooperation. We have to do something. We have to do something. The generation that finally woke up to World War II and fought it and preserved this country and the Western civilization for us has often been referred to as the greatest generation. The reason they were the greatest generation is that they were willing to face a problem and make enormous sacrifices in order to deal with it, to protect us and our children and grandchildren and our ability to function in this new world. They were the greatest generation. I have to say, Madam President, if somebody was going to characterize us, we'd be characterized as the oblivious generation. The generation that saw the data, saw the facts, saw the freight train headed for us, and said, that's okay, it's business as usual, don't bother me, I don't want to be inconvenienced. To go back to Churchill, the era of procrastination, of half measures, of soothing and baffling expedients, of delays, is coming to its close. In its place, we're entering a period of consequences. We cannot avoid this period. We are in it now.